Well, now let's turn to Steve Sherrill, and he has got something that I think is really going to be of interest to a lot of people. So, Steve, welcome.
Well, thank you very much, Jim. Looks like tonight was an O-scale night, and we're just going to continue on with that. Tonight, I'm going to talk about ON18. I want to thank Greg Cassidy for his help today. He's going to be showing my pictures when I ask him to. I built a little layout, a complete layout in ON18. Greg, if you'll put up that first picture, please. A lot of people want to know, well, tell me about ON18. How big is it? You know, just tell me something about it. So here is an ON18 Shay in between two ON30 small diesels. So you can see how small it is. Go ahead and put up the second one, Greg. Let me see what that says. Okay. Now, I said, this stuff is this small. How's it going to look if it was on a regular, real ON30 layout next to the O-scale buildings? So I set it on my railroad. Obviously, since it runs on an N-scale track, it's not going to be fitting on the track exactly. But you can see that, yes, you could get away with that.
No, Jim. Jim. No. Not Jim. No. Yes, Jim.
Huh? I don't know what that was. Anyway, you can see that it would go right on a regular layout. So go ahead and put the third picture up. Now, one of the things that I got was 3D printed locomotives from Carroll County Designs. The Shays on the left and the right, and in the middle is a Nomi streetcar that I'm kind of messing with. I don't know what I've got there, but anyway, it runs. And I believe the next picture, I tested all of these locomotives, well, the drive units, to make sure they ran. And I was absolutely amazed at how well these things run. Now, these are power trucks, power units that are $20. So this is a very, very economical way to get into an O-scale narrow gauge if you wanted to go in that direction. There is equipment coming out practically every day from different makers with 3D printers. You just have to go on eBay or Facebook or some of the other sites, Micro Madness, Small Layouts, things like that, to see what is available. Go ahead on the next one, Craig. All right. Can we get that a little bigger or not?
No, well, sorry, that's it.
Oh, that's it. Okay. I hope everybody's eyes are good tonight. So I came up with a track plan. And you can see that's a pretty small piece of wood there. Well, it's 9 inches by 30. It's literally a bookcase shelf. Now, I went in the back room there, and my wife had a bookcase and she wasn't using it. Now she's 1 shelf short. I hope she doesn't find out, but you know, that's just, maybe I'll make another layout. It should be 2 shelves short. But so I came up with a little track plan. I laid the track down, and the whole time I kept testing everything to make sure it ran. And then if we go on the next layout, I started figuring out where I was going to start putting stuff. And so this happens to be N-scale roadbed that I just used for an outline of a station I put in. Now, I was going to have a platform come off the track into the front part of the station. You'll see that when I show the finished layout. So what I did, I laid that out. Before that, you can see the roadbed, and all the track is Atlas N scale. Okay, so it's like $5 a stick for 30 inches long. And the layout had used 3 sections. So I had $15 in track, okay? And it's on the roadbed, and I forget how much that was. That wasn't very expensive either. But then after everything was down, I spray painted everything black. And after I spray painted it, I went ahead and cleaned off the tops of the rails. So go ahead to the next one, Greg. So here's the station. It's almost in place. I put coffee stirrers down. They haven't been stained yet. And so I put them down to see for clearance how close I could get them to the track. Now remember this track, well, I didn't tell you, but this track is 4-inch radius. 4-inch radius. Very, very tight. You can't imagine how tight this is. And I did have easements, believe it or not. See, Tom, I had easements into 4-inch radius even. You can do that. So that's what we had. Now go ahead to the next one, Tom. Greg. Now, because I like to have my track level, like it was laid in dirt or just laid on this type of ground, I go ahead and cover everything. Now in this layout, I covered it with Sculptamold, I'm sorry. Sculptamold. And I built up some of the corners, and you can see the corners are kind of look like they're a little bit bigger, a little bit higher, a little bit more of a corner type of effect. And you'll see what the result of that was later. But this gave me a nice surface. Okay, go to the next one. All right, now you can see what we have. The station is kind of in place. I put some ballast down. Now, I had some paint that I had the same color as the Woodland Scenic earth color, but unfortunately I left it in the shed for the winter and I could not get it to thin out. So I put it on anyway, what the heck, you know, I had plenty of time. But it was starting to take shape, and I always put everything down first with alcohol, straight alcohol. And that makes everything stay in place. It also helps when you put your ballast down with your glue. So I had a medium brown Woodland Scenic ballast and some cinders in there. So next picture, please. All right, now you can see what we got. If you look at the corners, you can see they're kind of raised. They may not be obvious yet, but they're even more obvious when we get more scenery on it. Now, I wasn't quite satisfied with the ballast. So I had some rock that I got, very, very, very fine rock that I got from the other side of the, up at Horseshoe Curve. It was only, as they come down the curve and through that cut, there was a side of a hill. And we climbed that hill and got a bag of that stuff. And after 20 some years, I still have some left, but it's the best you've ever seen if you want to use it around for rocks, little rock talus and things like that. You'll see, you get a closer view, I think, in another picture. Go ahead and now, wait a minute. You can see how small this is. This is my operator's desk on my railroad, and you can see it's on top of the operator's desk. And the door can still open. So that's how small this layout is. And you can see the 4-inch radius. And because it has a little swale, we get a little variation in the run. So go ahead, Greg. Let me see what we have on the next one. Okay, well, we've got some movement now. This whole time, I always test my locomotives all the time to make sure that if there's any problems, I can catch them. Okay, Greg, next one. I think they're all going to be small for some reason. Okay, well, good. Now you can see the rock. And that was just, I just wanted to put that down there. There's a little variation, a little different. This is all clumps, various grasses. And what I found in modeling is you can buy any green from more than one manufacturer. It'll be a different shade of green. It's just like brown and anything else. So I buy as many as I can, a bag, and then mix them. But these are all put on blenders. The clumps are blended. I put 2 or 3 colors together and get a blender. My blender costs $10 at a yard sale or something, and you have to get one with a metal spinner so it will cut the stuff and really grind it up. Okay, go to the next one. All right, here I am with most of the scenery down, most of the covering down. We still have more scenery to put down. The switch here is a Pico 9-inch radius switch. So that's like really broad compared to the 4-inch curves. So go ahead and put the next one.
Steve, I'm afraid that's the last one I got.
Oh, okay, good.
Sorry.
Now, that's the last one. So, well, I'm going to show you some things on the railroad itself. First off, again, we're going to show you the different sizes. That's On30 flat car with an On18 flat car on top. Same manufacturer, by the way. Identical, except different gauges. Now, not only did I put power, but I made it battery powered also. So if we look at so this is battery powered. And what I found in this, when you're dealing with N scale stuff, is the weight. You have to put a lot of weight on this because these 3D prints are so light. So this layout is self-sufficient. It needs absolutely no power from anybody. So I went to Michael's and got a backdrop. It was just something they had there. And so I just put it up to, cover the blank space. Unfortunately, just a minute, hang on. I have sound, but once I put it in, I didn't realize it was diesel. So anyway, it's a diesel sound, but I can always turn it off. So that's the good thing. Now this is going to also be antimonium on our table for the scholarships. And I'm hoping to get some interest put, to the layout and to have just to talk to people about new tracks.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
I thought ON30 had O-scale bodies on HO mechanisms.
No. No.
What is ON30 then?
It's 30 inches between the rails. So if you have 48, you're going to have something. If you scale it down, it's about 20% less.
No,
Less-
no, that's not what I'm saying, Steve. The way I understood it, if I made an OM30 boxcar,
Yeah,
the wheels and everything would be HO. The wheels,
yes.
the body of the car would be O-scale.
No, well, it's still going to be 148, but the dimensions are different. I believe it's what, 8 feet wide, the cars? The manufacturer dictated the width in a prototype.
So you're saying it would be smaller because it's narrow gauge to start with.
That's correct.
Like EBT, a boxcar is smaller than a Penske boxcar.
That's correct. That's correct.
So okay, so this has been, I'm probably the only dumb one that didn't know this. So what you're really doing is putting an OM3 boxcar body on top of HO trucks.
No. This car,
ON30 started in the 1970s using HO scale track and mechanisms. And people
Right.
did indeed take HO scale locomotives and put O scale cabs on them. Today, things like Bachmann, some of theirs actually, like their trench locomotive, does indeed use an HO frame and motor, but most of the Bachmann locomotives were built from scratch. They happen to be HO gauge, but the bodies are scaled to approximate narrow gauge equipment of the late 19th century, 25-foot long box cars and what I guess about 8 feet wide, maybe a little narrower.
So let me go back and see if I understand this. I'm a scratch builder.
yeah,
I'm not buying Bachmann. I'm ready to run or anything. I'm a scratch builder. What I understood OM30 to be is I would get some HO trucks that I already have, put down some HO track that I already have, and I would build an O-scale body and put it on top, and that would be OM30.
Well, you can do that, but the HO track, the ties are too short and too close together. So they now manufacture ON30 track with appropriate tie size and spacing. Similarly, the HO scale trucks, the wheels are really kind of small. And so there's such a thing as ON30 trucks. Bachmann manufactures them, and they have wheels that scale out at like 30 to 36 inch diameter, which is, considerably larger than what you get if you measure an HO scale wheel with an O scale measure. So yeah, plenty of people do use HO scale track, myself included, because I had so much of it. But when I go to scratch build an ON30 car, I use the Bachmann trucks, which have the larger wheels, for example.
But do you put an O-scale boxcar cab on?
No, I put it's narrow gauge, so I build it to narrow gauge dimensions, not a standard gauge boxcar, because the overhang is way too great.
So therefore,
like was just mentioned, the East Broad Top was, I think, the only narrow gauge railroad that had the capacity to take standard gauge cars and swap the trucks underneath them so that they could pull a standard gauge car on their 3-foot gauge railroad. And if you see the photographs of that, the overhang is amazing. The boxcar overhangs the trucks and the track by a large proportion, and then compare it to a narrow gauge boxcar, and it's much more proportionate. The width of the car is narrower, the overhang is much smaller.
now EBT was running 36.
okay, hold it, guys. Let me see let me try one more time here. There is OM30 there is ON30 and there is ON30 fine scale.
No,
Those are hold it.
No.
Those are my hold it. Those are my definitions. ON30 fine scale would use the correct wheels, the correct track, the correct scale locomotives. Everything would be perfectly scaled for ON30. ON30, at least when I first heard about it, my interpretation was, and see if this is right, HO trucks, because way back then there were no fine scale ON30 trucks that I'm aware of. And instead of standard gauge boxcars, I would use an ON3 boxcar and put it on those HO trucks, and that would be ON30. Is that correct?
no,
Technically, ON30 just refers to the gauge, that it uses HO scale track, which happens to work out as a 30-inch gauge. And after that, you use HO equipment, scratch build equipment, kit bash equipment. As long as it's 30-inch gauge, that's ON30.
I want to share screen a second. If it'll do it. Let's see.
what's that?
Let me see. Or no, I just want to, hold on.
Greg, you still there?
It just spotlight me. I want to just show them this.
Greg, can you put up like the first, second photo?
Because I have no idea.
Yeah, Tom's showing
There you
the
go.
comparison first. Let him finish first.
Okay,
Jim, there's a standard O-scale boxcar, right?
Yep.
Below it, and on top is a Bachmann ON30 boxcar. See the huge difference in them?
Yep. And so what you're saying is ON30, everybody would be using the smaller boxcar on HO trucks. Is that what you're saying?
No, well, theoretically you could use HO trucks, but we have narrow gauge ON30 trucks that have larger wheels.
right.
So in the very,
So that is ON30.
in the very, very beginning of time, when they started ON30 in the 70s, you would use there was a lot of HO stuff that was used. But with Bachmann came on board with all their stuff, we got much more accurate with our wheels, our trucks, our size of the cars, our locomotives, everything. Just kit bashed, put together.
What about
And as
what about
Jim
structure?
mentioned,
Are the structures smaller than O-scale structures?
no,
No.
Well, no,
but
but
you can compress them to make them more size friendly. But the doors are O-scale, or 1/48 scale doors, 1/48 scale windows. The figures are standard O-scale figures.
we tend to make the structures smaller, but they're still an O scale. Is our little
Yeah.
game. That's our little game in narrow gauge.
Now, see, this is what initially confused me last week. And after I did some research, I found out a little bit more about it. But at first, I thought it was running O-scale trains on an N-scale track, and that was literally what it was,
N-scale
with O-scale structures and O-scale scenery. But it's much more than that, apparently.
There's N-scale does not enter into ON30. It enters into what Steve's doing on ON18, I think he calls it,
Right.
which is N-scale track with O-scale locomotives. You can't confuse gauge with scale.
Right.
Yes, you're right. I misspoke. ON18 and ON30, but still,
No, it's
I
always
was
O-scale.
picturing a very giant, boxcar or locomotive on a very narrow gauge track for the purposes of tight radius or any other reason why you might need to implement that, but is it more than that?
Well,
For the
Remember,
novice?
ON30, the whole idea is to model narrow gauge in O-scale.
So it's specific railroads that use that.
Yes.
Yes.
Well, there were very few railroads that actually were 2.5-foot gauge in the United States. Most of them were 3-foot gauge, but it's a compromise because HO track and switches and so forth is plentiful and relatively affordable. That it was an affordable way to get into O-scale narrow gauge.
So it's in no way a leg up for the modeler to condense their space or have better track layouts. It's just another way of modeling actually correctly what you see in the real world if a railroad happens to use that gauge.
Except you can indeed use much tighter radius than you would use in standard gauge O-scale, and that works because narrow gauge railroads had very tight radius.
The whole idea of ON30 and Steve's ON18 is that when you're physically modeling structures and things, you're at O-scale. So it's easy on the eyes and it's easy to add an enormous amount of detail, much more than you could ever hope to do in HO or N. And
how about let me ask this. Is there anything from a modeler's, and this is definitely geared toward you, Tom, is there anything from a modeler's perspective, in your opinion, that would be out of gauge or out of scale if we modeled this particular scale?
Using another scale.
you're talking about gauge or scale? Oh, everything
the scale of the buildings around it, the scale of the scenery.
They're all absolute. Everything I do is absolutely O scale and would be perfectly at home.
Yeah.
Model size O gauge like this, right? And
all the buildings on the layout are O scale.
All my buildings are absolutely O scale. There's no compromise. Although we as a group tend to make smaller buildings, but they're still an O scale. But they can get quite large. I'll show you. Hold on. I have some large buildings. You know, this is 17 inches tall. Okay, that's full on O scale.
Right.
So don't confuse gauge with scale. That's all.
Now, if that was a real railroad, they wouldn't have a tower that big. They wouldn't need one that had, they would gauge that or scale that down rather.
Well, this is,
if you were in Durango or Chama, it would look a lot like that.
That is the one. Yeah.
Well,
Yes,
you're getting to my question. Yeah, there it is.
Oh,
this is the Durango Tower to scale from the actual prints I got from Tim Molina. This is exactly the Durango coal tower. Exactly.
Right. Now, but 36 and remember now, they had some coal locomotives out in Colorado. They were standard gauge locomotives that they put on narrow gauge.
That's correct. The Denver and Rio Grande Western's late steam locomotives, in many cases, were standard gauge steam locomotives that had their frames narrowed to run on 3-foot gauge track. And they're rather interesting looking locomotives because they have large boilers on narrow gauge frames.
I have a Bachmann
They're
engine.
rare, incidentally, in the model community because they've been modeled by a few companies who sold them at extremely high prices, and they don't fit around the radius that the Bachmann equipment will run. So,
here in America, we don't model 30-inch, but you go to Australia, places like that, they have 30-inch that was almost mainline, and so, we just don't have that, and I don't think I've ever really seen a 30-inch locomotive, personally, except in the models.
South America also.
Hawaii.
Some of the Bachmann prototypes
Hawaii,
are 2.5-foot gauge, and they were in South America.
Yeah, South America also.
So let me ask, since I made a fool out of myself with ON30, obviously I don't understand what ON30 is. What is ON18? It is ON18, as I understand it, is in scale track,
Oh,
is in scale mechanism, wheels, motors, that kind of thing, mechanism. On what? O-scale? What?
Right, on those.
I'm with you, Jim.
It's not
It-
that hard. What is so hard about this? There's
It's
gauge.
confusing when you say N gauge and HO gauge. We're modeling in O scale, which is one scale. What he had, the two box cars, they were the same scale, but one was just a smaller car. It's like out on the highway, you got a Lincoln
Right.
beside a Volkswagen. They're
They're
both the
both
same
O
scale.
scale. These are both.
And we're doing ourselves an injustice by talking about N scale track and HO track. We're in O scale, and so you're setting your rails at either 36 inches apart or 30 inches apart or 18, what Steve is
Inches
talking
apart.
about. But it's the scale, it's in that scale. It's scale.
Yes. Still have-
You're confusing gauge with scale.
Yeah.
Yep.
I think that's the only thing that confused me. If I would have heard it as O scale, however, a narrower gauge within O scale, and instead of being called N scale, I probably would have never had this problem initially.
Right.
Yeah, I think
That's
the
what some
point.
people use N scale just for their convenience, and they don't, because they don't want to hand lay it. If you were hand laying any of those gauges, it would be O scale set at those particular gauges you wanted.
Right.
Yeah, that's
Yeah,
what
now
the
that
names
you
are.
word it like that, it makes complete sense. Yeah.
The name ON3 means O scale narrow gauge 3 foot. ON30 is O scale narrow gauge 30-inch gauge. ON18 is O scale narrow gauge 18-inch gauge.
Right.
So let me ask you this. When you say O scale for ON18, how long is that boxcar?
It's 1/48th of life size.
It's
It-
what,
it- It's probably gonna be a 12 or 14 foot length,
yeah, it's
10 to 14. You know,
And also, is that an attribute of everything incorporated in the diorama or the layout? Everything, period, except for the gauge of the rails.
everything's O scale. You could have a gigantic building 4 feet in length, 2 feet high in O scale on an ON18, and it wouldn't make any difference. It's the
It would be exactly the same structure.
yeah,
Right.
exactly. We're all
The only thing that's varying is the gauge of the rails.
Well, no.
Gotcha.
Well, wait a minute. I'm still confused. I may be the only one, but I'm still confused. The structures, the people, everything on my layout is O scale.
correct.
1/48.
1/48th.
That's everything is that, right? Okay. So I want to go ON30. Instead of using my standard O scale track, I need to use the equivalent that Bachmann makes that comes out to be basically in scale diameter.
No, that's ON18 you're referring to.
Yeah.
Talking
Yeah.
about N scale, it's the gauge.
Okay. I understand it is the gauge.
So ON30.
But wait a minute. Okay, let's move on because obviously I'm the only one that is not what I think. And I could be crazy, but I think what I'm saying is people who are not building ON30 or ON18. I don't think they understand, as I don't understand, what you all are trying to communicate.
Well, I do have one last question. It would be if you are narrowing the gauge of the tracks, the two rails, the distance between the two, does that mean that for an O-scale train, you also have to make the wheels smaller to be able to perform on that track? So the wheels might be the only thing not in scale, or are they the same O-scale wheels?
The
and
wheels
trucks?
are scaled. Tom, show him the Bachmann boxcar.
Yeah,
That just seems very difficult to make an O-scale
well, just let me,
wheel
remember-
run on an N-scale
just-
track.
let me,
The N scale one is a hard example because it's so small.
Well, then we'll
Let's
do
stay with
ON30.
ON30 for
ON30 is
the
fine.
moment.
For an example, ON30 is perfectly fine, but
And you look at the wheels on there, and those wheels are scaled to be an appropriate diameter. So they're actually a little bit bigger than HO scale wheels. If you run ON30 with HO scale wheels, the wheels look a little small, the car sits a little low. Plenty of people do that because it's convenient, but that Bachmann boxcar that Tom's got on the top has got scale size wheels, scale size flanges. They're not fine scale, but they are, they're not Lionel type flanges either.
and the truck width and length is the same as well to
The trucks,
work
if you
with
set
those
them
radius.
side by side, if you set it side by side with an N scale or an HO scale truck, you will find that the distance between the axles is slightly longer than an HO scale truck. And there Tom is showing you a O scale
Interesting.
standard gauge truck compared to an ON30 truck.
and I could get an HO car. Let me get one. There,
Yeah, yeah. If you've got an HO scale truck. Also, incidentally, while Tom's doing that, it turns out that 18-inch gauge is prototypical. Google it, and you will find that there were railroads in England and in Wales built to 18-inch gauge for mining and for industrial. They're really neat.
United States too. There's a lot of industrial usage.
Oh yeah, I won't argue that at all.
Here's an HO. I don't have an HO boxcar handy.
Yeah, turn it upside down so you can see the trucks side by side.
Yeah, so they would run on the same track. I can run this.
Right. They're the same gauge, but notice the distance between the axles is not the same.
And the
Yeah.
side
And the
frame-
wheels are smaller.
Yeah, the side frames are larger on the ON30 than on the HO.
Right.
Yeah, look at the size of
Tom,
the.
a little to your left.
Yeah, here we go. Let's see here. It's reversed, that's why. So
Now, here's the kicker. If you brought a Lionel car down, which is supposed to be O-scale,
I have one.
an Atlas, you'd say, well, that's not O-scale.
This could go on forever.
There's a Lionel. Fortunately, I own everything in the planet. Here's a Lionel car, right?
Yep.
Mhm.
So they're the same physical size, but the trucks are, one is toy-like and one is scale.
Are they the same width? They're not
Yeah.
the same width, are they?
No, Lionel is not strictly 1/48 of life size.
We call it O-scale, O-gauge, but it's not. I don't
Yeah.
know what it
It's gauged to 5 feet, I believe.
Yeah, it could be. I thought they were the same width. Let's see. They're the same
No.
width. Yes,
Oh, well, that's an Atlas. That's not a Lionel car, is it?
the K line.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Lionel's gonna be different. And O27 is even different yet.
So
Yeah.
look how smaller the
And we're
HO.
not even talking about SN3.
I don't have any S scale. I've got everything
Well,
else. Scale,
But just remember, everything here is O-scale. Okay? It just happens to use N scale to run on. That's all.
Correct.
There's nothing else in scale on here. If it is in scale, it will scale out to something less in O scale, because obviously it's what? One's 148 and the other's 260 or whatever it is.
there's a, can you guys all see this?
Yeah,
Yep.
There is scale, O scale, standard gauge track sitting next to ON30 track. Is, I don't know.
Now,
if you-
see, that is exactly what I wanted to see to be able to understand it. Thank you, Tom.
Well, here's something that you probably won't realize. Let me get this so you can see it.
But I'm also realizing that this is something that could be beneficial for modelers as well as anybody who is modeling a particular prototypical line.
Yeah,
Look at this. Here is
because I guarantee you this, that we need a segment on this, Steve,
yeah.
because I guarantee you I am not the only dumb one out there that doesn't understand. And I understand scale and gauge. Believe me, that is not my problem. My problem is that when people talk about it's all O-scale except for the gauge, what they're thinking is standard O-scale.
That's correct. And that's why the narrow gauge guys are not really accepted by the O-scale standard guys.
And that explanation needs to be put forward, because I think I'm fairly knowledgeable O-scaler. And guys, I'm telling you, if I didn't know it, then I am not by myself.
I don't know.
There's a lot of O-scalers that do not understand this.
Yeah.
And I'm one of the people that I was on the editorial staff of the 48-foot O-scale magazine at the time when they put ON30 on the front cover for the first time.
Yeah.
And the complaints that we got about that were phenomenal, because O-scalers said, nope, that's not O-scale. Get it out of here. Get it off the front cover. We don't want to talk about it.
Well, they're wrong.
Well,
that was sold at that time, as I remember it. That was sold at that point. It's all O-scale except for the gauge.
That's correct.
That is how I understood ON30.
Yeah.
Well, you're right there. The only difference is the gauge.
but I'm telling you, you're right about
But people took O-scale, Tom, because people said, well, are the buildings, oh yeah, it's an O-scale building.
It is.
Oh yeah, water tank is fine, it's O-scale. Oh yeah, people are O-scale.
They are.
And what they assume by saying ON30, with the gauge being, frankly, the track and the wheel sets, they took the rest of it as the same as the buildings, the people, and everything else. It was O-scale.
Well, it is. Yeah, they're absolutely right. We do tend to build smaller buildings just out of habit for narrow gauge operations in general. But there's no law that says you have to do that. You can build full-size buildings, large buildings if you want. But, you know, the whole idea with the big...
That's what they thought about the cars and locomotive bodies too, Tom, is what my point is.
But if you see a prototype, I can do an internet search and show you a prototype of a standard locomotive and a narrow gauge locomotive, a prototype, and there's a huge difference.
huge.
Huge.
Oh, God, you can't believe.
I understand, but you know, I don't want to argue about that. I'm not trying to argue about it. I'm just telling you that I don't think that a lot of people understand this.
You know, I have a problem with O-scale proto. If they're the O-scale, what is everybody else?
Well,
Well,
the
if you talk from their standpoint, you're not a legitimate O-scaler.
I found
Now
that.
now you guys are starting to sound like us S-gaugers.
Oh, you're right.
when we talk,
Hey,
It seems like it's a very niche community, and I'm sure that all the work is absolutely phenomenal. And most of the people that probably choose to model in this gauge or scale do phenomenal work. But I'm just wondering, is it going to do something possibly to entice new people to come to the industry? Is it difficult to do? Is it easy to do? is scratch building and kind of building everything yourself almost a necessity within this, or
No.
is it quite easy?
Take a look.
That's a great picture, Tom.
Yeah.
This is a narrow gauge locomotive prototype. See, the people are all the same size. We don't run midgets on here. And this is a standard locomotive. This is the huge differential. See the standard gauge track, the narrow gauge track. The narrow gauge boxcar, look how stupid this little boxcar would look getting pulled by this enormous locomotive. So
Let me ask you a question, Tom. The narrow gauge that you're showing there, that compared to O standard, that would be ON3, right?
yeah, this would be ON30.
That's
Or-
two.
No, ON3 is narrow gauge O scale.
Actually, the train you're showing there is a 2-foot gauge Maine Railroad.
Yeah, but the idea,
That's the Maine Central.
ON2.
the idea
But this is crazy. Seeing it in real life is completely different than when I see two models next to each other. Now that I see
two
it
models-
represented in real life, it's, you know, it's also, it's very distant from anything I could have ever seen in my real life. So, but still, it's very nice to see that in real life represented in a photograph.
and this
Some
is
people who have the space actually put that on their model railroad, and we'll have some standard gauge O-scale cars
what's what
on
I
a standard gauge track, so you can see that on the model railroad and appreciate how much smaller the narrow gauge equipment is.
that's exactly why I showed that photograph of my John Allen engine house with the standard gauge line in front of it. I park a standard gauge boxcar on there, and right next to it I put an ON30 boxcar. So the first explanation I tell people is this is an O-scale layout that I model in narrow gauge. This is how large a full-scale boxcar would be compared to a narrow gauge boxcar. It's just like this photograph.
So in actual operations in real life, they do modify the boxcars and the rolling stock to perform better on the narrower gauges,
They
not
don't
just
modify.
model.
They don't modify anything. They're made specifically for narrow gauge. This little boxcar has no business ever being given a set of trucks to run on a standard gauge. It never would happen.
I think that's what I meant by modification, but they build them specifically to run on narrow gauge.
Correct.
So even though it looks smaller,
It is.
it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. In the 19th century, there were numerous manufacturers manufacturing narrow gauge railroad equipment.
Yep.
Passenger cars as well.
Yep.
Let me ask this. Is an ON3 narrow gauge boxcar
They're
suitable for ON30 use?
if you change the trucks, yes, but normally the ON3 stuff is slightly larger.
Because
Just
it's
by-
36-inch
So
versus 30.
I have converted a few ON3 brass models to ON30 by putting ON30 trucks on there, but they're slightly larger cars. But they're still all in O scale, but they're just, the nature of ON30 is smaller stuff to run on tighter radiuses. That's why we call ourselves the black sheep. We're not necessarily rivet counters.
Okay, let me ask you this. Are there manufacturers who are producing ON30 correctly sized models?
Yeah, all of them are
Yes.
correctly sized. And
For
sometimes you
example,
can-
San Juan makes the same box car that they sell as ON3 and ON30, and the only difference is the distance between the wheels.
and you can buy locomotive.
So they use the ON3 car.
Correct.
Okay,
So
but
their standard box
but-
car
but
will
that-
scale
but
out as 30 feet long. Bachmann's standard box car will scale out as 25 feet long. What they used were earlier prototypes to run on smaller model railroads.
Besides San Juan, who uses the incorrect scale for their model.
No, there's nothing incorrect about
No.
San Juan. They're dead on accurate, precise.
Well, if they're using OM3, I thought Tom just said that wasn't.
The
Well-
ON3, San Juan's ON3 cars are rigorously to scale. And then because of the popularity of ON30, they just regauge their trucks and sell their cars as ON30 cars as well.
Correct. They're all interested.
Oh, okay, that's fine. I have no problem with that.
There are plenty of
promise
modelers,
this
you
is
know,
the
who
last
model in
question.
ON3 and you know, they have to hand lay their rail, or I guess now there are some commercial manufacturers of O-scale 3-foot gauge track. But in the old days, if you wanted to be ON3, you had to hand lay your rail, and that's why ON30 became popular. It's because you didn't have to hand lay rail; you could buy commercial track and
Hey.
commercial mechanisms.
Let me ask my question a different way again. Besides Bachmann, is any other manufacturer producing scale bodies for ON30?
Yes.
Not ON3 that they're using for ON30,
Yes.
but are producing, as Bachmann supposedly is or did, actual ON30 sized bodies.
Yes.
Yes.
Who is that?
There's a brass,
Yoder.
there's a brass locomotive you can buy in ON3 or ON30. It's a K.
Yoder.
Other
Yeah, they're MMIs.
MMIs, it's about,
They do C19, K27s,
you
K36.
can order it. Your K30.
Okay, so that's locomotive. I'm talking about cars.
Yeah, same. The San Juan, for example, you can get them.
But that's
but very
that's
few.
ON3.
Say
That's
the least.
ON3.
Very
There
few.
are not a lot, but I think Banta has some ON30 cars. There are a couple of commercial manufacturers, their kits, you know, either wood or resin, that are sold as ON30.
Let's take
Okay.
2 steps back and so you understand the nature. ON30 was basically developed to offer an inexpensive way to get into narrow gauge railroading in O scale. Historically, ON3 narrow gauge O scale equipment was typically brass, very expensive.
Yep.
And what Bachmann did 20 years ago, I forget the fella's name that led the charge. He's since
Lee
passed.
Riley.
Yeah, he led the charge and created all these locomotives, all these cars. He created a whole new segment that we call ON30. Now, people were fooling around with ON30 kit bashing, but I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the large commercialization of ON30 was done by Bachmann.
Right.
And and compromises were made to some degree in some cases, but we're always O scale, just different gauge. You know, locomotives that
The
were
last question I want to ask about this is the picture that you showed of I think it was a black and white photo, Tom.
yeah,
The narrow gauge locomotive next to the standard gauge locomotives, both were steam, I believe.
there
Did
it
they
is.
have to hire jockeys essentially to run those locomotives?
Now, if you
Because
look,
they seem so tiny.
now, if you look at this cab, it's a full size height. Okay, like I joked in the beginning, we're not running midgets in here. This is a
Yeah.
full size. It's a
That-
full size cab.
From personal experience, this June I rode in a narrow gauge steam locomotive cab and I did not hit my head on the ceiling.
That is quite unbelievable.
Doc,
But look,
to
I mean, I see what you mean by the cab. But I mean, also, I guess it's narrow gauge and probably point to point operation. So you don't need the ability to run 200 miles or something on these locomotives, right? So that's part of it.
Here, look, see how large this cab is in proportion to the boiler?
Yeah, I mean, I love it. I just think it's such a very narrow
Well, that's what
niche market,
it
but I
is.
love it.
I mean, in the game of model railroading, HO is the largest, then N scale, then O scale, then maybe S scale. Way down the bottom somewhere is ON30 and ON3. There's far more ON30 modelers than ON3 modelers.
Yeah.
Just a little bit of trivia on
And
that.
now we got ON18 to add to it.
Yeah.
That small engine that was in that black and white photograph is 2 foot in Maine. And a little bit of trivia, it was very, very tight inside. So many times the engineer, when possible in nice weather, his upper torso would be sitting outside a bit on the windowsill.
Yeah.
The cab window, just for room.
Oh, get out of here.
Many 3-foot gauge locomotives, the cab was small enough that the fireman did not ride in the cab. He rode on the platform on the front of the tender.
Let me ask you all this. Do you think that this kind of a discussion would be beneficial on the show, just to open it up? I mean, as a regular part, because we don't have, if you notice, the scales that we don't cover narrow gauge really.
Oh, I think I do every week.
Yeah.
No, we definitely cover it. It's just that, like I said before, I think it's a very narrow niche. And it just depends on what we want to do with the show. I enjoy everything that I learn on this show, and I enjoyed everything I learned tonight, but is it something that will bring new people here? That I don't know.
Well,
Well,
new people,
from my perspective, here's what I'm thinking. Is this part of HO, or is this part of O-scale?
It's O scale.
Oh,
yeah.
The advantage, I mean, the advantage of ON30 is that you can use H or narrower type radiuses, and you can model an O scale, which is much easier on the eyes and much easier to get greater detail than N or HO. I mean, you see the work I do, it has a lot of detail on it. That's why I switched. I started with N scale in 1967. It came out 1965. I used N scale from 1967 to 2005. To my right, I have 95 locomotives. I moved from N scale to O scale because I was not happy with the detail that I am a scratch builder. And with O scale, it's far easier to get great detail on an O scale model than an N scale model. That's why I switched.
Well, perhaps that could be a good selling point for new people as well. It's much easier to learn how to paint or glue or build, especially if it's a kit, something that's a little bit larger when you first get started. But you can also, if you use this scale, or you could build a layout on a fold-out table in your spare bedroom at your mom's house. So you get kids involved in something like this, and they could learn, the fundamentals.
What Steve's trying to do with his ON18 is demonstrate that you can run a narrow gauge locomotive in O scale and do it on a shelf and not hurt your eyes like you would with an N scale.
That's right.
Yeah,
Okay,
I think that's just as important for children as it is for the older generation. When someone's first getting started.
I do too, particularly young people in an apartment.
Well, let me say this: you're not going to get the market has exposed people starting out to modern day railroading. That's the first thing you see is diesel.
Definitely.
That's what they see at the railroad crossing when Dad stops, and gripes because he has to stop. It's a diesel, and that's what the kids want.
Yeah.
And so if you're steam guy, you're probably old.
Gotcha. Well, listen, I hate to do it, but the show is running over, and it's my fault because I asked so many dumb questions. But I apologize for that.
There's no.
So let's stop this. We can continue if you want to later on after we terminate the show. But let's go ahead and finish this out. Thank you so much for doing this, Steve. Thank everybody for putting up with my stupid questions and so forth. But I'm serious. I think a lot of people, if you went to it, let me put it to you this way. If I went to an O-scale convention and started talking to the O-scalers that were in attendance, I think that I would have a majority of those people say OM30 is taking an O-scale boxcar and putting it on HO trucks. I really believe that.
Wrong on both accounts.
And that I think is an issue that, yeah, I'd like to see dealt with somehow on the show, because I do think that that's important if OM30 is ever going to be really accepted in the O-scale community. I think that the O-scale community needs to be educated, because I do think that that's important. Anyway, thanks so much, guys, for putting up with me. I appreciate it.